Let's talk about the power of the tip sheet or the downloadable PDF file that you offer for prospects for them to become leads or to otherwise get familiar with what you do. So I'm Justin Hitt from Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips, and one of the copy pieces that's very easy to write, especially early in your content marketing, is to write down the tip sheet. What are the 21 ideas for networking? What are the 13 different ways to approach a problem? Now, these tip sheets are really good for organizing your ideas and your thoughts, or when you're working with a client to organize their ideas. Maybe it's 12 ways to work more effectively with a copywriter, and then you just list the 12 preferences you have for clients to work with you. Well, what's important about these elements is they have value, they're useful, they give the what Zig Ziglar used to call the cafeteria style. They give that person a touch of many different concepts or approaches. But what it does is it leaves them with the question about, what do I do next? So if you're going to write a tip sheet, you need to have contact information in that tip sheet. You need to have it on your letterhead or something that presents authority. Now, I used to use my letterhead and print the tip sheet and put a cover letter on it and mail it to prospects. Now, the cover letter would be a simple AIDA, attention, interest, desire, and action. And it would basically say, hey, a lot of folks have been asking about how to create profitable business relationships. So what I've put together for you is 21 ways to create profitable business relationships. It includes, and then I highlight the benefits, and then I said, well, to save you some time, I included a copy for free in this envelope. If you need anything around this topic, or you have additional questions about the ways to increase profits in your business, then contact me. Sincerely wishing you all the best, blah, 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 a little PS. Maybe the PS would talk about an event that's coming up, or invite them to get a free report that expands on what the tips we're covering. But they're pretty much getting a gift of a tip sheet that's very easy to read and very easy to go through. Now, sometimes I'd take the tip sheet, so it would be on my letterhead, it would be the tips, and then at the end it would be a byline and then some kind of call to action. Sometimes I'd write on the bottom of here, please feel free to pass this along. And I went to a client site one time. They'd been a prospect for a while. I'd sent these letters out, and then I'm in their office, and they had this folder. They opened up the folder, and they say, well, let's talk about this project I'd like you to consider bidding on. And I said, well, I don't bid on projects, but you've hired me to consult. Let's focus on answering the questions you have to solve the problem so that when you do hire somebody, you get the best value. And they said, great, no problem. So because I don't go out and do dog and pony shows anymore. I supported dog and pony shows in the past. I've done dog and pony shows. I literally get paid to show up and talk about their project. But here's the important part. They opened this folder up, and it had a couple of these tip sheets where they had highlighted sections, where they had drawn circles around stuff, where they had photocopied the original document, because again, I sent it on my letterhead, basically just printed it on my letterhead. I'm printing like 20 of these at a time in the office. Again, sent to a targeted list. The person retained the document because it was personal, it was valuable, and it actually gave them a starting point. And then they contacted me based on the byline to have a paid consultation. Can you see how this works? So if you're going to write a tip sheet, special report, if you're going to write a mistakes report, 17 things to avoid, it's great to publish it on your website. Yeah, that's nice. But how about publishing 3 tips and then having a call to action where they can opt in to receive the PDF that it contains the 20 tips? See, people online are very busy. They're very distracted. And if you can get their attention long enough and you get their interest in the topic and you build up the desire and the benefits of being involved in that particular topic, then you can ask them, hey, look, I put together these 17 tips. It's a great resource to get you started. It's an instant downloadable PDF, or it's something we can mail to your office. Click here to get more information. They go to the document itself. They just basically opt in, and it gives them the document immediately. And then they read the document. You want them to be able to say, wow, I've gone on these journey, I've taken these couple of steps, and I'm really, really interested in this topic because they gave so much value up front. How do I contact them? And I pulled up a tip sheet here, 21 foolproof ways to network like a pro. And it is actually a really good tip sheet. And networking is something that I'm interested in. So I look it over. But if I have found this document through a search, because remember, our prospects show up in different ways, and sometimes we can't control how they show up. I show up in the office, I'm paid to be there, I see them open this folder, and there are photocopies of things, stuff they printed out online, stuff that they passed around the office. These people talk about stuff before you get there, but it was very easy on my materials for them to contact me. And by the way, this little folder and some of the things they wanted me to look at, I didn't create that stuff. But some of it was so generic, and it was valuable, but it was so generic that it was hard to know who it came from. And in their mind, they attribute it to me. So you don't need to spread around this piece of advice. It's something very valuable for you, but make sure that if that tip sheet was printed out, crumpled up, thrown in a corner, uncrumpled, laid out on the table, read out loud, that there would be some way of knowing where it came from. Because the worst thing that can happen to you is for someone who uses this advice to take your customer because, hey, that person's out there taking notes. That person's interested in hiring a service. This person's interested in investing in a solution. And they're in the discovery mode and they get these documents, but then they have no path back to you. I think it was Dan Kennedy that talks about that every piece of material that you put out there is an offer. It has a deadline. It has a reason to contact you. It has the way to contact you. It has some kind of offer. So there's the same way you might send a cover letter on a brochure or a booklet or a tip sheet, for example. And I got the idea of the tip sheet from Bob Bly, and it works. But you got to make sure it can work if it was all by itself. That envelope goes through the mail, the cover letter gets lost, and all that is left is that one page of your 2-page tip sheet. Now you print it front and back, and that customer's like, what the hell is this? Oh, wait a second. I'm reading it. It's interesting. It's pithy. It gets me involved in the concept. It gets me thinking about problems that I might be facing. But what do I do next? And then they wander off onto the interwebs, caught like a bug in a spider's web, and they never come back to that time that you had their attention for just a moment. You had their interest for a few seconds, but you didn't guide their interest into some kind of action. So whether you're writing a tip sheet for somebody else or you're writing it for your own business, you want to make sure that you put it on letterhead or some kind of masthead. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a tip sheet, a prospect newsletter, a bulletin, an alert. It doesn't matter if it's a special report. You got to have some way for the person, when they're done reading this, to take all that admiration and all that appreciation for the insight that you've shared with them and apply it towards that next step. What is that next step? Well, it could be contacting you for a consultation. It could be contacting you to discuss their next project. It could be to stop making these mistakes. It could be all kinds of stuff, but it's got to be something tangible. It's got to provide contact information, and it's got to call them right now to do something. Now, as you've seen of some of my older tip sheets, is they still have an old address. They still have an old phone number. You know, I know how hard it is to keep these things up to date. So that's why I find printing them onto a letterhead is probably the easiest thing. Now, if you store these documents in PDF form, you've got to still think. You got to have basically, this is now we go into the editorial process. You've got to have your master for printing. You've got to have your master digital version, because you know in PDF files you can actually track open rates. So you can also have some digital tracing so that you can find the documents if they get spread around the internet. Cataloging so that the customer can find them after they saved them to their hard disk, because you know a lot of people just download PDFs and save them to their hard disk. But now you're going to have on the back end the proof for printing, the proof for distribution, and then the original master, because you can, guess what? And I've seen this many times. You can revise these tip sheets over time. So many of my tip sheets that have the old address on them, I edited the PDF and I put some of them on my catalog for just $1. So the tip sheet, I think a $4.95 price on a tip sheet's pretty good. The price is primarily to imply value. I give the tip sheets away sometimes when people ask questions. But when I add to a tip sheet, Like my 101 strategies for more profitable customers started out as 21 strategies, and I'm sure it was 7 before that. It ultimately can be reeditioned. So you can send an email out to your list and say, oh, by the way, I recently updated my 21 foolproof strategies to network in a modern LinkedIn world. Because maybe you wrote it 20 years ago and it was for face-to-face communications. And you've tuned it for how people react during COVID. So here's a perfect example. You take the tip sheet, 21 foolproof networking tips for the COVID world. You edit some references on social distancing and stuff and how to maintain connections and the importance of a handshake for physical interaction, but the mindfulness of the person's response if they are concerned about the COVIDs. And then you reissue it by sending a letter to your key clients. So I would send 20 to 50 letters to my top prospects that I would by hand print those babies out. Well, my assistant would print them, fold them, and then assemble them. And then before we sealed the envelopes, I would take it out and I'd handwrite a little note on it. Hey, Jim, it was good to chat with you last week. I think this tip sheet's really going to make a difference. /Justin. And put it back in the envelope. And then my assistant would seal all the envelopes and mail it. Now, for the general audience, we might send a postcard, maybe 100, 250 people. We'd send a postcard out and say, by the way, we just published a new tip sheet. Now, that's not really the headline. That was deep down somewhere in the copy because nobody gives a damn that you just printed a new tip sheet. I would have a headline, and so using this foolproof networking or networking like a pro, I could open with a postcard that says, "Are you looking for upward mobility in your career? ? But COVID is in the way. 21 foolproof ways to network in a COVID world." Recently released update to our proven networking techniques. Get connected in a COVID world. Still be able to get career advancement. Send $1 to cover postage and receive this free tips report. Now, if you got a really good prospect list and your list is clean, I don't want them $1. I would say, it's $4.95 on my website, but I'll send it to you for free if you simply send me your questions about networking. And then you have the call to action with the details. Now, one of the reasons that I like to use questions for networking or questions as a means of sending them a tip sheet is because here's what I end up doing. I might have 21 tips to do this and 15 ways to do that and 7 key strategies to approach this other thing. But then when people write back with their questions, I can actually have 12 frequently asked questions answered type of material. So I'm really interacting with the audience in order to build the materials. But again, how do they know to contact me instead of going out on the internet and searching and going and asking someone else or participating in a forum and not really getting answers that are tangible for action? Well, again, it's printed on a letterhead. It has a byline. I might even put my little picture there because I want to make that physical connection. That physical connection helps them know, like, and trust you. That takes the words that sell a little bit further into actions that buy. Does that make sense to you? And now, folks, there's a lot of tip sheets out here, and I'm not really recommending this, but there are a lot of tip sheets that have a real big space in the top, and they're tips, and there's a big space in the bottom. If you don't put your contact information on it, someone is going to paste up your materials on their letterhead and profit from your effort. Now, this is unethical, but a lot of the competitors that you face today are unethical. I'm not saying we got to stoop to their level. I'm just saying we've got to be more complete about what we deliver. If you've got value and you can deliver, if you can even write down 21 tips, you can turn that into 21 postcards in a weekly series campaign that offers the overall 21 tips. But because not everybody's going to see those postcards, you can start with a mailing list and start sending the series down the mailing list. And then when someone responds and gets the whole 21, you take them off that list and you put them on an inquiry list. And now you can pitch them for an event or a networking training or something like that. We really want to take these tools and increase their utility value about how we apply them or present them in the marketplace. So I know this conversation is really for the copywriter. It's for the marketer, not really for your client. But when you work with the client, this is a way of showing them that paying a little bit more for the tip sheet you wrote or the special report you wrote or the materials that you put together is worth it because it can be reused in such a powerful way. But do not make the mistake of not having full contact information on that same piece of material that's presented in different mediums. You might be printing it out on a letterhead when you physically send it, but you got to make sure you have a proof copy that is used for the digital asset. And you can load that in a catalog. You can load that in a shopping cart to give it some monetary value. And then ultimately, you need a byline that establishes the authority of the individual who wrote the document and then calls the reader to action to take that next step. The postcard goes out, the letter goes out and says, oh, by the way, we have this new special report, and it shares it gets their attention. It shares the interesting values of the report. It describes the benefits and tells them how to get started quickly with it. Could just be a link to your website, but ultimately, the next piece of material they receive is part of that chain of communications that steps them through the value and then offers them something. It doesn't have to be a monetary offer, but at the point that they're reading your 21 tips, if they get to the bottom of the 21 tips, they're going to ask, who is it? Who wrote this? Wow, this is great. Who wrote this? Who should I be talking to? What is the next step that I should take? And if you give it to them in that document in all forms of media, you're going to get better results. And you can even code these things to measure them. I code the hell out of everything so that I can measure what paths work, because I could be warming up a list for a client on their training programs that they're offering this year. And a tip sheet's a great way to get started. But again, if you have 21 tips and you're not walking through those tips to get people queued up for your seminar, then you just got 21 tips and that's it. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. When you write in with your questions, you're going to be part of a network of individuals who are driving forward not only the skills of copywriting, but the business of copywriting and how they can apply that in consulting platforms, in coaching and publishing areas, how they can apply that in a marketing agency or business development consulting itself. But it's really about getting more from every word you've written. Once you get a control that works, there's so many ways to recycle that marketing so that you can transform business relationships into profits. Again, thanks for listening. And this has been about the basics you need on a tip sheet and then why that's so important and helps you get more from every word you've written.